Is the KLX250SF just another terribly slow and boring street 250? Or is it something actually worth owning and keeping? We'll be discussing that in this video. Frickin' Jim here, and this is an in-depth review of the Kawasaki KLX250SF. The KLX250SF is a street-legal, liquid-cooled, 249cc, carburetor-fed, dual overhead cam 4-stroke single with a 6-speed transmission and supermoto-style 17-inch rims front and rear. Kawasaki designed it to be a more road-oriented version of the dual-sport KLX250S. This review will discuss and demonstrate a variety of topics, including ergonomics and comfort, suspension, brakes and handling, load-bearing and passenger carrying, electronics and lighting, engine, transmission and fuel efficiency, reliability and maintenance, upgradability, and I'll wrap up with the final opinion I've come to after thoroughly testing out the bike. Before we dive into the review, I'd just like to give a huge shout out to Vegas Girl for enabling this project by providing the 2010 KLX250SF for review. There's a link to Vegas Girl's channel in the video description, so please check her out after this video. Alright, on to the review, starting with ergonomics and comfort. In stock, unmodified condition, comfort is not a thing that exists on the KLX. The seat is a very narrow, very thin piece of uncomfortable padding that stretches along the top of the motorcycle. It is just the bare minimum to even be considered a seat. I am fairly tolerant of uncomfortable seats, and even I feel kind of miserable when sitting on this thing for an extended period. A modified or aftermarket seat would be a big upgrade for rides longer than 30 minutes. The thing that I do like about the seat is how flat it is along its front to rear profile. You can very easily sit right up on the tank when cornering, contributing to the fantastic cornering ability, which I'll discuss later. The layout of the handlebar and foot pegs also feels very smashed together and cramped when sitting. With my lanky build, the relationship of the bars and pegs on this bike makes it feel less like a 250 and more like a pit bike. When standing on the pegs, the bars feel really low and too close to the foot pegs horizontally, which makes the bike difficult to handle off-road compared to a true dirt bike. The stock foot pegs come with huge rubber pads installed to kill vibrations, and while they do kill vibrations coming through the foot pegs, they also contribute largely to the cramped feel of the cockpit by making the foot pegs much taller, and they feel really unstable when trying to stand on the pegs. Removing those pads is one of the first things I would do if I owned one of these bikes. Of course, there's no wind protection at all, but that's actually fine since the bike has such a low top speed anyway. Another thing I'll discuss later in the review. The mirrors are acceptable, but they are a tad low and they can't really be raised. It seems that Kawasaki decided to go with sleek looks over functionality on this one. They also keep coming loose and moving around when riding in the dirt, which is really annoying. I much prefer the double take enduro mirror that I use on my other dual sports. The throttle operation is very smooth thanks to the CV style carburetor, which means the throttle only has to actuate a small butterfly valve on the carburetor instead of the actual slide of the carburetor. So at least the throttle is comfortable and doesn't tire your wrist out on a long pavement ride like the heavily sprung round slide carburetors do on my converted dual sports. The clutch lever operation is about as smooth as you can expect from a cable actuated clutch, which really is pretty smooth, and the clutch pull is super easy. I have no problem using one finger all day on this clutch. Clutch free play and engagement point is adjustable via a standard knurled adjuster and lock nut at the clutch perch, but there is no cable adjuster at the clutch end, which is sort of odd, but it does make clutch adjustment simpler, so I don't really see it as a bad thing. Another odd thing is the lack of engagement point adjustment on the front brake. This is common on lower-end dual sports or pure street bikes, but this is a supermoto bike where one of the selling points is the huge front brake. So I expected at least the same simple engagement point adjustment found on every dirt bike ever, but I guess if you can't adjust it, you also can't mess it up. And I was happy with the piston engagement on the non-adjustable lever. Overall, not a comfortable bike for a full-size person. Maybe one of the most uncomfortable things I've ridden. But it wouldn't be difficult to fix it. With just a DIY seat modification job, or aftermarket seat, removal of the garbage rubber peg risers, and handlebar risers to move the bars slightly forward and slightly upward like I've done on my little CRF 230, and I could see myself going on big adventures with the KLX, just like I have done on my other bikes. Suspension, brakes, and handling. Well, suspension, brakes, and handling is what the Supermoto bike is all about, and this thing does not disappoint on winding pavement. It is really, really fun to whip this little thing around. I am fully convinced that 17-inch wide rims on an off-road chassis is some sort of magic for the street. Compared to a street bike, the KLX250SF feels feather light and ultra nimble, like you just have to think about tipping it into a turn, and then it's already freaking doing it for you. Compared to a dirt bike or dual sport, the KLX250SF, even without 100% street tires like this one, feels precise and stable when maneuvering on the road. Feather light and ultra nimble, yet precise and stable? In the motorcycle world, we rarely ever get to experience anything that is truly the best of both worlds. So Supermoto handling is really exciting for me, and I totally understand the Supermoto appeal now. Gliding effortlessly through the mountains on this bike definitely put a huge smile on my face. The actual suspension on this bike is light years ahead of the technology you'll find on low to mid-tier street bikes like most in the 250, 300, and 500 classes, as opposed to the old tech, right side up damper rod controlled forks found on similarly priced and even more expensive bikes in those classes. The KLX 250SF features 43mm inverted cartridge forks with about 9 inches of travel and externally adjustable compression damping. The forks are fully adjustable internally by modifying the shim stacks of the cartridge valves, which can be done at home or by any decent suspension shop. But I found that the forks work very well on the street in completely stock condition. They aren't even bad for a little bit of off-road. I wish my CBR 500R forks were this good. The rear shock is also a really nice remote reservoir unit. It allows for about 8 inches of travel, has a threaded, turn-adjustable spring preload collar, externally adjustable compression damping, and externally adjustable rebound damping. It is also fully adjustable internally, just like the forks. Again, no complaints of the rear shock on the road. It is just ages ahead of what you'll find on street bikes in the price range of the KLX 250SF. Of course, in standard Supermoto fashion, the front brake is a powerful 300mm semi-floating rotor pinched by a dual piston caliper. The fact that it is a floating rotor is pretty neat. Again, a really premium feature that you're getting on a really low-priced bike. A floating rotor means that the braking surface of the rotor is not mounted in a solid fashion to the mounting portion, which is bolted to the wheel hub. That allows the braking surface of the rotor to expand quite a bit from the heat of heavy braking without being constrained by the mounting portion, which is what normally causes warping of the rotor. Basically, this front brake can slow the bike down from its top speed in a hurry with little effort and without any heat issues. It might seem to be a little overkill since the bike can't really get up to a speed where the big floating rotor would be a necessity, but when actually out riding this thing, it is really nice to be able to stop on a dime with very little effort. The front brake on this bike gets an A grade from me. The rear brake is a standard 240mm solid rotor with a single piston caliper. No complaints here, it works great. Overall, the handling on the street is the highlight of this bike. That is what this bike is all about, being super easy and quick to maneuver. In the dirt, this bike is a completely different story. While the KLX is perfectly capable of getting from point A to point B on easy, hard-packed trails, the 17-inch front wheel is totally unhappy in soft terrain that must be planed, like sand and gravel washes. Trying to get through desert washes that I normally just glide right through on my other bike bikes with 21-inch front wheels was a tiring struggle on the KLX. Still, at least it is off-road capable. It just definitely does not excel in the dirt. Load bearing and passenger carrying. The KLX is built with an extended steel subframe and fold-out passenger pegs. While you could take a passenger, it would be really cramped and uncomfortable for both the rider and the passenger. Not to mention, the power, which I'll discuss in a moment, is just not there for pulling lots of weight. I can't see it being a fun experience. For carrying luggage, there are plenty of options. Universal tank bags can add easily accessible storage, and there are full-size racks available for the rear end. This bike could definitely be outfitted for adventure use. The only limitation would be its relatively low cruising speed and poor off-road performance. Electronics and lighting. The KLX, of course, comes stock with a 12-volt DC lighting circuit, 6 amp-hour battery, 200+ watt stator, and full lighting. The headlight housing is rather massive and is illuminated with a 60/55 watt dual filament H4 bulb. I found the beam pattern to be beautiful on low beam, but kind of strange and too linear on high beam. The brightness and throw is acceptable for around town use, but on roads outside the city I would prefer something a little brighter and with a broader high beam. Luckily, adding some extra lighting would be no problem at all thanks to the beefy 200+ watt stator. Considering I've made the lighting on my CRF230F excellent with the constraint of an 80 watt stator without compromising the battery charging, the KLX should be capable of ridiculously good lighting. The dash display on the KLX is a blue backlit LCD. It displays engine RPM, current speed, the time, and the bike's odometer. There are 2 buttons, a mode button and a reset button. The mode button switches the dash display between total odometer, trip A odometer, and trip B odometer. The dash display also has an indicator light to keep you aware if the turn signals are activated, a neutral light, a high beam indicator, and a coolant temperature warning light. There is no fuel level indicator or low fuel light, but the bike will let you know when it's time to switch to reserve by simply coughing out and dying. Engine, transmission, and fuel efficiency. The engine is a 4-stroke, dual radiator liquid-cooled, 249cc, over-square, dual overhead cam, 4-valve single with a 34mm constant velocity carburetor mated to a 6-speed transmission with an electric start. Sounds like a pretty screamin' 250 single, right? Well, it's actually disappointing, and here's why. This engine just fails to produce any real power under 5,000 RPM. That makes it feel a whole lot slower than it actually is. Rolling on or snapping open the throttle at under 5,000 RPM pretty much feels like nothing is really happening. So if you're cruising along and you need to get going quicker, downshifting a couple times is pretty much a requirement to get the bike moving any quicker. Even compared to the famously slow CRF230L, the KLX just feels very unresponsive. Now, once you're closer to 7,000 RPM, then the KLX starts to pull decently, and it keeps the power up acceptably all the way to the 10,500 RPM rev limit. Still, when about half of the bike's RPM range is next to useless, it really makes the bike feel slow. I think the 34mm CV-style carburetor is mostly to blame. I bet anything that a switch to a standard or pumper carburetor would greatly improve the throttle response on this bike. As far as the absolute acceleration goes on this bike, it depends on a lot of variables like rider skill and weight, riding elevation, and final drive ratio. But measuring several 0 to 60 mph runs, that's 0 to 96 km/h, with this KLX at 3,000 feet elevation with my 140-pound body and standard gearing, my fastest run was just under 9 seconds, about 8.9 seconds. degrees. That means at sea level, it should be approximately on par with the CBR 250R and CRF 250L. So it's not going to smoke a great many vehicles out there on the road today in a straight line. And passing power on the freeway? Well, allow me to demonstrate with a little game called Trying to Pass a Prius. Catch the Prius! Oh no, he's getting away! Alright, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna draft this car and slingshot around the Prius. Come on, yeah, here we go! Ha ha! Ha 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 ha! Got him! Yeah, that actually took over a minute of wide open throttle and some help from an SUV to get past that Prius on the freeway. So, accelerating in a straight line is not something this bike is very good at. It's acceptable, of course, and you can get around everywhere without getting run over, but the point of this bike is not at all to be going in a straight line. Like I said earlier, this bike begs to be maneuvered, and it is so fun to throw it around, so riding it in a straight line is just a shame. And of course, to answer the all-important top speed question, I found that the bike can do a little over 80 miles per hour or 128 kilometers per hour on flat ground, but it takes ages to get up to that speed. And the highest speed I reached was 91 miles per hour or 146 kilometers per hour on a downhill. And wheelies? Well, it can do them just fine, but in higher gears, it is limited by a weak clutch. Besides the weak clutch, which could easily be improved with shimmed clutch springs or stiffer clutch springs, the transmission on this KLX is fantastic. I noticed some early reviews of this bike which claimed it suffered from notchy shifting. However, notchy shifting was not at all an issue on this KLX. I did notice that it is a bit reluctant to shift if the clutch is dragging at all, so maybe people experiencing notchy shifting have too much free play at the lever and are letting the clutch drag without knowing it. It's hard to say for sure without having another KLX to compare this one to. But standard shifting was buttery smooth on this bike for me, and clutchless shifting was also flawless. But that's not even what I love about this transmission. What I love is the gear ratio layout. When you're pushing the bike hard, rowing through the first 4 gears, each shift lands you right back into the power, so even though the bike is pretty slow, it's at least fun to make it sing and listen to it buzz through the first 4 gears as if it were fast. 5th and 6th gear are also really tall and great for just cruising around, and I really like that. The really tall 6th gear makes it feel less abusive to run the bike on the freeway. Even though you'll pretty much be wide open throttle to keep up with traffic, at least the engine won't sound like it's screaming out super hard. During my time testing the bike, it averaged 55 miles per gallon or 23 kilometers per liter, and that was with me having fun on it, even doing some off-road, and not making any effort to conserve fuel. So fuel efficiency on the KLX is decent. It would be a lot higher if I wasn't gooning it all over the place, I'm sure. At 55 miles per gallon, with only a 2-gallon tank, the tank seems to go dry quickly with only a 110-mile range. 110 miles is acceptable range for a dirt bike, but on something that is primarily meant for the road, that's pretty weak. Reliability and maintenance. The KLX250S and SF share an engine design with the old KLX300, which had undeniable valve wear issues when run hard for thousands of miles. But the KLX250S and SF are largely detuned in comparison and don't seem to have as much of an issue. Having a look around on the ADV Rider forum, there are a few people with tens of thousands of miles on their KLX, with most people just replacing the soft OEM clutch springs to get more longevity out of the clutch. That's about it. Regular maintenance includes changing the oil and filter, cleaning the reusable foam air filter, maintaining the coolant level, replacing the brake fluid when it starts to look old, keeping the drive chain at proper tension, and keeping the steering stem and rear linkage bearings greased. And valve clearance inspections should be done every couple thousand miles or so. The oil capacity on this bike is pretty good at 1.5 liters, much better than the sub 1 liter capacity of other bikes out there. You'll likely never burn enough oil to run low with that kind of capacity, especially since the right side case has an oil sight glass, making it easy to check the oil level before each ride. Upgradability. Most people are focused on improving the throttle response and power output when modifying the KLX. The typical uncorking mods include opening up the airbox lid and changing the jetting to match. That generally yields an extra horsepower or two, which is quite significant. Beyond that, there are more serious internal engine mods. A common practice is to adjust the timing of the OEM camshafts so that the engine actually has some decent low RPM pull. This is something I would definitely do to one of these bikes. And of course, the hot ticket for big horsepower is a 351cc big bore, which everyone seems to be really happy with. There is a lot more aftermarket out there for the KLX, but doing just these simple things would really make all the difference for this otherwise sluggish bike. Final opinion. So here it goes. My opinion is that this bike is a lot of fun for playing around on the street, but only in environments where the quick handling makes it shine. The serious lack of torque is a bummer in any other situation, and is something I would probably need to address in order to make it a bike I would want to ride often. It's not like I'm some sort of a horsepower junkie either. Look at my other bikes: a CRF 230F, an XR 250R, a CBR 500R, and a QT50, a relatively slow fleet. So the fact that I find the KLX to be sluggish means it really must lack some character. It could be good for commuting and adventuring, since it is decently fuel efficient, and it can handle torn up back roads and dirt roads with ease, but it would definitely need a larger fuel tank and an improved seat. It might not be the most practical bike out there for a lot of people, but I do think it has its place. People just starting out in street riding will love this thing, because it feels so small and light on the street, and it doesn't require much skill at all to have some fun on a curvy road. People that have dirt roads in their commute might also find that this bike is a keeper, since it doesn't mind going off-road nearly as badly as a street bike does. And people that just want a bike that can carve twisty roads with ease might also enjoy the KLX. If you've ridden one of these bikes, let us hear your experience in the comment section below. If you'd like me to make more of these bike reviews, check out the Patreon link. If you haven't yet subscribed, hit the subscribe button for more in-depth motorcycle reviews, bike builds, tests, moto Q&A, and pure moto shredding.